Hello everyone, my name is Professor Hitanshu Vyas and we are here for the revision of paper 3 cost and management accounting, a 100 marks paper. In this video we will be talking about cost sheet and we will be revising the topic. Now you have revised this topic, you would have solved also long time ago. I'm sure you will remember it's kind of a format chapter, but then at the same point of time there are certain points which we need to look forward before starting this topic. So I'll of course start the topic with some points. Remember my dear friends, this topic has been asked multiple times for past some time now. In past few attempts regularly they have been asking. If they suddenly change something, we can't help, but then at the same time, if they continue the trend, we must do this topic really well, and it's an easy topic, so you can score wonderful marks as well. With that, I'll bring few points in front of you, my dear friends. There they are. So, as I said, the points are right in front of you. First, we will discuss about classification of cost, and the major classification of cost is based on variability. Fixed cost, variable cost. Of course, there is semi-variable cost. We'll take a look at it a little later. But then at the same point of time, fixed cost and variable cost. What is fixed cost? Fixed cost is the cost which remains same irrespective of level of activity. Whereas variable cost is the cost which changes with level of activity. The best example of fixed cost is rent. Simplest possible example in fact is rent. Whatever you produce, whatever may be the number of units specifically that you produce, whatever activity that you do in the place that you have hired, the rent will not change. In fact, for that matter, if you are in the business of manufacturing and even if you don't produce anything, still the rent will not change. Whereas the best example of variable cost naturally remains materials and wages. The more you produce, more material will be required. The less you produce, less material will be required. Same will be for labor. My point is pretty clear that variable cost will change with change in level of activity, whereas fixed cost will remain same irrespective of level of activity. That brings me to my next points, which are of course mentioned in front of you. Fixed cost in total remains the same, variable cost per unit remains the same, and fixed cost is a total concept, whereas variable cost is a per unit concept. So naturally we can conclude these things regarding fixed cost and variable cost. And now I will move on to something very, very important, my dear friends. Very important from problem solving perspective. Any changes would mean increase, decrease. Any changes in case of fixed cost should be done on total basis, whereas any changes in variable cost should be done on per unit basis, of course, unless otherwise specified. If the problem is specifying something, we can't do anything. Problem says do this, we do that, we have no choice. But unless otherwise specified, any changes in fixed cost should be done on total basis, any changes in variable cost should be done on per unit basis. Second important point, sometimes a connection is given between a cost item of two products. Sometimes a connection is given between cost items of two products. If that connection is given for variable cost item, then such a connection must be created on per unit basis. Please remember this. Like for example, question might say that material of product B is 10% more or costing 10% more than that of material for product A. My dear friends, this is a connection given between cost item of two products. This is a variable cost item. So this connection must be created on per unit basis. And after that, last point, for this particular part, should I say, direct material and direct labor should be considered as an items of variable cost only. That is one part of classification. Now we move on to other part of classification, and for that I will bring one chart in front of you. Give me 1 minute. The chart is right in front of you. This is another classification of cost. We call it based on elements of cost: material, labor and expenses. This is a revision lecture, so I am not going in detail, pretty obvious, but then at the same time, materials can be further divided between direct and indirect, labor will be further divided between direct and indirect, and expenses will be divided between direct and indirect. Direct material, direct labor, direct expenses, that total will be known as direct cost. We can call it as prime cost. We do call it as prime cost. Indirect material, indirect labor, indirect expenses, we call that total as overheads. And depending upon when and where those overheads are incurred, they are further divided. If the overheads are incurred at the time of production, we call it as production, manufacturing, factory overheads. And second major activity, sales. So whatever overheads are done for that particular activity, we call it as marketing overheads. Marketing overheads further can be divided in selling and distribution. We all know that, but we can't forget that there will be certain overheads incurred to manage both these activities, and those overheads are known as administration overheads. But administration overheads incurred to manage production activity is known as admin overheads related to production, whereas other admin overheads are known as general. Some people prefer to call it as admin overheads related to sales. So this was the basic idea of the classification of cost, at least whatever is required from our point of view. With that, now we move to cost sheet format, which I'll bring it up in front of you. Give me 1 minute. And the format is right in front of you. Let us start going through this. I'm just supposed to remind you, you know the format. I respect that fact. But then, as I just said, we are revising. So let us revise the format as well. Raw materials consumed, that is what the heading that we begin with. Consumed means used. So how to find out how much raw material is used? Opening stock of raw material, it will be there. Plus you will purchase something, naturally it will add up to your raw materials. Now you might incur some carriage on purchasing the raw materials. I repeat, you might incur some carriage in purchasing the raw material. It will increase the cost of your raw material. So we will add carriage inward. And my dear friends, there will be certain closing stock of raw material. Obviously, you will not be using it, so it will not be part of your raw material consumed. There will be purchase return as well. Naturally, those materials you have returned, so not part of your stock anyway. And finally, there can be something known as scrap of raw materials. These raw materials, you would sell it in the market as a scrap. You will recover some money and it will have an effect of reducing your raw material cost. So we subtract it as a scrap of raw materials. That entire discussion gives us raw materials consumed. But wait, let me tell you something. In certain questions, under certain scenarios, they do not give so many details. They simply stick to something what is known as direct materials. Naturally, that makes our job much easier, and we directly can write the word direct materials in our format as an answer. After that, direct labor and direct expenses. Direct material, direct labor, direct expenses. We just discussed some time ago in the chart. That will be known as direct cost, but we call it as prime cost as well. And that prime cost appears over here. Then I got to adjust the overheads. So next is works or factory overheads. Once works or factory overheads are added to prime cost, what we get is known as gross works cost. But then we got to adjust opening and closing stock of work in progress. We get factory or works cost. Then after that, we furthermore adjust quality control cost, research and development cost. These two costs will be given to us in one or the other way in the question. We put it over here. And after that, admin overheads, administrative overheads, but related to production. We spoke about that a minute ago or so. And then after that, a long item, credit for recovery, scrap, byproduct, miscellaneous income, etc., etc. But generally, we come across something known as sale of scrap. And then packing cost, primary packing cost, whatever you call it. When you adjust all these things to works or factory cost, you reach to cost of production. I got to discuss something about cost of production a little later. Give me a moment. And when you adjust opening and closing stock of finished goods to that, you get cost of goods sold. And after that, you can see these both overheads, admin, general, marketing, that is selling, distribution. We have discussed, my dear friends. There is no, there is nothing new over there, if I may put it that way. Cost of sales also can be known as total cost. If you add profit to that, you get sales, but sales minus total cost is what will give you profit if sales is given in the question. With that, I finish the discussion of cost sheet format, but as I told you, I got to discuss few things about cost of goods sold and cost of production. Give me 1 minute, I need to get the board in front of you. Okay, so now, yes, I agree, we just studied the cost sheet, but then the cost sheet format had certain specific things. I just wanted to explain that separately, so that's why I have got this board in front of you. There is a part which goes like this: cost of production plus opening stock of finished goods minus closing stock of finished goods. So what you get is known as cost of goods sold. This part I want to explain. So cost of production indicates cost of goods produced in current year. Please remember these words, this is very important. Cost of goods produced in current year, and to that you add opening stock, subtract closing stock, you get cost of goods sold. Just a small point, let me change the format a little bit to explain these words. Let's say you have an opening stock of 10,000 plus cost of production. As I just said, it is cost of goods produced in current year. You produced goods worth rupees 1 lakh in the current year, which means total goods that you had in the current year is 1,10,000. Out of that, let's assume you cannot or you could not sell goods costing 20,000. Could not sell means what? Goods were ready, you could not sell. It's closing stock of finished goods. So let's say your closing stock is 20,000. Now naturally, you had goods worth of 110. You could not sell 20, which means you could sell goods costing 90,000. You sold goods costing 90,000. In other words, we call it as cost of goods sold. And that's how these words, cost of goods sold, come into existence, my dear friends. That's how we refer it. So that is a point which I specifically wanted you to understand. Now we move on to certain other points. For other points, I must bring another notes in front of you, which I will bring it within a second or two. We discuss those points and then we move on to questions, and that discussion of questions should suffice in this format chapter like cost sheet. So I'll bring that screen in front of you. Give me 1 minute. These are the points which I wanted to talk about. Number of units. First, that is, how do you calculate these number of units? Opening stock plus produced minus closing stock is equal to sold. Any three details might be given. We calculate the fourth one. Simple. Then, to calculate per unit amount. For that, let us understand something. We need to calculate CPU, cost per unit. So how do we calculate? From the start of cost sheet till cost of production, the entire cost sheet is related to produced quantity. So for that matter, any calculation should be done using produced quantity. I want to calculate per unit cost, which means I need to divide by number of units. That will be produced units. And from cost of goods sold till the end of cost sheet, the whole cost sheet is basically, the whole meaning, that part of cost sheet, should I use the words, is related to number of units sold. I want to calculate per unit value, so I need to divide by number of units, which will be nothing else but sold units. So that part is done, my dear friends. For opening stock of finished goods, we will divide by number of units of opening stock and we will get the per unit figure. Now I move on to something very, very important, deadly and tremendously important. Pay attention. Stock valuation. So we have three types of stock: raw material, work in process, finished goods. In this chapter, usually value of raw materials and work in process stock will be given. We are talking about finished goods. We will be given finished goods units. We need to value that. Well, the most important sentence, you can put it that way, of the whole discussion: in cost accounting, stocks are valued at cost. In cost accounting, stocks are valued at cost. In cost accounting, stocks are valued at cost. So what do? I need to value my closing stock of finished goods. I already have number of units. I of course will have to calculate some per unit figure or find out some per unit figure, which we will use to multiply the number of units of closing stock. Now let's take an example. Let's say my closing stock units are 1000. Closing stock of finished goods units are 1000 units. My cost of production is 1 lakh rupees. This is if CPU column. I will calculate per unit figure as I told you just. We will take 1 lakh and we will divide by number of units produced. Let's say my number of units produced are 10,000. So per unit figure will be rupees 10. What does this 10 mean? This 10 means that 1 unit costed me 10 rupees. This 1 unit costed me 10 rupees. At the end, I have 1000 units. So my closing stock will be 1000 units into 10 rupee per unit is equal to 10,000. So how did I calculate? I calculated it something in the way in which is there in front of your screen. I first found out cost of production and divided by number of units produced. So I got CPU, cost per unit of cost of production, and then closing stock of finished goods units were taken and multiplied by CPU of cost of production. That is how we value closing stock of finished goods in cost sheet chapter generally. Now we finished the stock valuation. There are certain small points which I believe you will remember, but anyways, even if you don't, that's my duty to make you remember. That's why I'm here, in fact. First part, there are certain items of cost which we don't record in cost sheet, like for example the financial expenses we don't record in cost sheet. We don't record any incomes in cost sheet, and then there are certain disputed expenses. I repeat, disputed expenses. Those expenses have two treatments. Some people record them, some people don't record them, give various treatments. I'll give you two examples of such disputed expenses. First is discount allowed, second is bad debts. Some people prefer to call it as selling and distribution overheads, which means it will be part of cost sheet. Some people prefer to call it as a financial expenditure, which means it will not be part of cost sheet. We consider both this as a part of the financial expenses thing, and we don't consider this in cost sheet. So these are few small points which I thought I must remind you at this stage, and because of that, my dear friends, now you remember everything related to cost sheet is done. Now I would like to go towards questions for which I need to bring the cost sheet textbook in front of you. Give me 1 minute. So here goes the cost sheet textbook in front of you. This is question 1. Now the following extracts of costing information, etc., they have given the whole question. There is nothing great in this question. Hopefully you would remember, a very simple question to begin with, but few points. First, this was the first question where you actually valued closing stock of finished goods using that CPU of cost of production. So you cannot forget that part. And secondly, we just discussed that certain items will not be part of cost sheet, but in this question we included discount allowed in cost sheet. That is simply because we do not have a breakup of 0.40 per quintal. If we would have been given a breakup of 0.40 per quintal, then at that point of time we would not have allowed discount allowed to be part of cost sheet, but we don't have a breakup. So despite knowing the fact that we do not include it, we had no choice but to allow discount allowed to be part of cost sheet. So that was the first problem. With that, I finished my discussion of the first problem. Now I move on to the second problem. Again, a very simple problem, nothing great, nothing superb, nothing amazing, but cost of sales was given. When you prepare a cost sheet, you will come till cost of goods sold, and then there will be cost of sales. There will be a gap in the cost sheet format. That gap, some people would like to call it simply as marketing overheads. Some people would like to call it as admin and selling overheads. No specific instruction given, so a little controversy exists. But then at the very same point of time, a very important principle is created over here, that if you are finding a missing figure in cost sheet, then you will have to go reverse, and when you go reverse, signs will change, add will become less, less will become add. So that point I hope all of you will now remember, and I move on to the third problem. Again, a very easy problem, no doubt, but few important points. Like the first one, they have directly used the words materials, no raw materials consumed, etc. I told you that that can happen. So direct materials are given, direct materials, direct wages. Then after that they have given the breakup of factory overheads items. So those factory overheads items we have of course written it in the inner column, and we could also see sale proceeds of scrap, which we call it as sale of scrap in this question. And again, in my humble opinion, one of the most important point concept wise of this problem is all units were sold. So whatever you produced, all units were sold, which means what? Which means that There was no opening and closing stock of finished goods in this question. So we can conclude two things over here. One, whenever there is no opening stock of finished goods and closing stock of finished goods, number of units produced will be equal to number of units sold. Cost of production is equal to cost of goods sold. Two important points that we can conclude from this. With that, I finish my discussion of question number 3. Now I move on to question number 4. I'll bring that up in your screens. And the moment you look at the question, you would have realized, oh, that long question. Long but easy one. Based on the concept that if there is a connection given between cost items of two products, then if that cost item is a variable cost item, then such a connection must be created on per unit basis. Major concept involved was that. Of course, I'll show you few calculations in that and then we will go ahead. But a very important question in my humble opinion, this one. So let us read that first. X and Y shoe polish company manufactures black and brown, etc., etc., etc. And here, this is 1.08 and 1.20 respectively is SPPU, selling price per unit. Of course, direct materials, polish strengths, direct wages, production overheads, we call that as factory overheads. And an interesting point to note, a very interesting point to note, they have used the words admin and selling overheads. They themselves have connected this admin with selling, clearly indicating that this administrative overheads are general, which means that in this question, there is no admin overheads related to production. In this question, there is no administrative overheads related to production. If you remember the format, you would realize, which means factory cost itself will become your cost of production because there is no admin overheads related to production. So I will mention that no admin overheads related to production. Now they have given the sales quantity, that is 1440 and 6 lakhs, and they have given the opening and closing stock. And we had to find out produced units, which we did. In case you recollect, if you haven't, anyway, solution would be with you. For black, it was 15 lakh units, and for brown, it was 5 lakh units. Now, try to understand. The next point says very clearly, opening stock of black and brown polish was valued at its production cost of paise 80.4 and 86.4 per tin respectively. So what do we do? 80.4 and 86.4 per tin. It's paise. We naturally need in rupees. So 0.804 and 0.864 rupees is what we do here. Now, there comes a sentence on which practically the whole question was based. I mean, it was the similarity which was carried through further. It said that the cost of raw materials for brown polish is 10% higher than that for black, but there is no difference in the cost of tints. The connection is given between direct materials of two products, black and brown. Direct materials, unless otherwise specified, is a variable cost. So is direct wages. Let us perform these calculations for our benefit at least once, and then of course the whole question will go in the same manner. Just wait for a second, guys. I need to bring the board in front of you. The board is right in front of you. What did the question say? The question said that cost of raw materials for brown polish is 10% higher than that for black. So as I just said, we need to create the connection on per unit basis. So I will write it this way. Working note 1. Direct materials but in that we are talking about polish. So I write it now. Let the cost per unit of brown's cost is higher. So I will take black as base. I will take black as X. So of black be X per unit. Therefore, cost per unit of brown B. Now see, it's 10% higher. I repeat, it's 10% higher. So this X is 1X. Now I want to take 10% higher. So what do I do? 1 plus 10% of 1. Take 1 on your calculator, add 10% of that. It will be 1.10x per unit. 1.10x per unit. That's it. Now we have got total, now we have got per unit cost. I can certainly find out my total cost. So here I write total cost for black and for brown. Black units, if you still remember, we discussed it, 15 lakh units. Brown, 5 lakh units into. This is X per unit and this is 1.10x per unit is equal to. This will be 15 lakh X and this is 5 lakh 50,000 X. So total is 20 lakh 50,000 X. But this is what material cost we got in the form of X. We are already given material cost in the form of rupees, which is 7,38,000. So what do? I'll write it this way. However, total direct material polish cost is equal to 7,38,000. Therefore, 20,50,000 X is equal to 7,38,000. And therefore, X is equal to 7,38,000 divided by 20,50,000 is equal to, we get 0.36. Now from here we can calculate cost per unit as well. You can see that 20,50,000 now, and I can calculate cost per unit. So here I give the heading cost per unit black and brown. Black was X, brown was 1.10x is equal to 1.10 into 0.36 is equal to 0.396 per unit is equal to 0.36 per unit. And with that, now I can calculate my total cost. So for total cost, what do I do? For total cost, black and brown, 15 lakh units and 5 lakh units into 0.36 per unit and 0.396 per unit is equal to 15 lakh into 0.36 is 5,40,000, and 5 lakh into 0.396 is equal to 1,98,000. Naturally, the total will be 7,38,000. And in the same way, I repeat, in the same way, we can continue for the calculating the cost for tins and direct wages. The question further tells you that the production overheads, we call it as factory overheads, are proportionate to direct wages. Now, the moment you will calculate direct wages for black, let me give the heading, and of course, since you have the solution, I'm not wasting your time further in revision. For black, direct wages would be 1,80,000, and for brown, the direct wages will be 64,800. You are told that factory overheads, that is production overheads, are proportionate to direct wages. So how to calculate? It varies with direct wages, proportionate to direct wages. I'll just show you for black. Certainly you can do it brown for your own. Your direct wages and factory overheads. Your total direct wages are 244,800 and your total factory overheads are 367,200. So if on 244,800 your factory overheads are 367,200, then for 1,80,000, how much will be your factory overheads? And if you do the cross multiplication, 1,80,000 into 367,200 divide by 244,800, and you get the answer of 2,70,000. Same way you can do it for black, or rather same way you can do it for brown. Should I use the words black? I just did. And well, that is it. With that, you can of course calculate your factory overheads. The last sentence says that the admin and selling overheads is absorbed at a uniform rate per tin of polish sold. Uniform means the same. Uniform means the same per tin. They themselves have said, which means per unit. We have to follow that. We have no other choice. And per tin of polish sold. My humble point. They have given the word sold, but even if it would not have been given, we still would have taken per tin of polish sold only. These are admin and selling overheads. It's related to, I repeat, it's related to selling quantity only. So the same type of working note will follow, except the fact that here we have taken the produced quantity, but in that working note we will take the sold quantity. With that, all the important points of question number 4 I have considered. Of course, don't forget to value your closing stock of finished goods at cost per unit of cost of production. With that, now I finish the discussion of question number 4 and I'll take you to question number 5. For that, I'll need to bring the cost sheet textbook again in front of you. Give me 1 minute. This is question number 5. And the moment you look at this question, you would have realized very long question, but then at the same time, you would also remember that multiple items had multiple treatments, isn't it? So a point to learn from here is that whenever there are multiple treatments, we select any one treatment, write a note for our treatment so that there is a clarity in the solution. But then nothing great with this question. Otherwise, classification was important. Multiple things can go at multiple places. Controversies existed, but then our note will settle us the issues. And now with that, I finish the discussion of question number 5. And wait, let me make you very happy. Just a second. Yep. There it is, my dear friends. It's the summary of all the questions which we just discussed. I have written it. Of course, you can view it later for your revision purpose or a quick revision purpose. I might add, what you are seeing is first 3 questions, I'll bring another two questions also in front of you. Give me a minute. There it is, the other two questions. With that, I finish my discussion of the chapter called Cost Sheet. I hope you have revised well. I thank you so much for your time, support, and patience. Keep on supporting, guys. We will shortly meet for revision of other lecture. Thank you so much.